A biker pushed a royal guard to the ground, thinking he'd proven his superiority. But as the guard rose from the stones, that moment of triumph turned to terror. One precise grip was all it took to teach him the difference between real strength and empty intimidation. Here's what happened. But before we continue, let us know in the comments below where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel, as tomorrow at the same time we bring you another remarkable display of royal guard valour that you won't want to miss. The morning air at Windsor Castle carried an unseasonal chill, the kind that made the tourists pull their jackets closer as they gathered to watch the changing of the guard. Guard James Mitchell stood at his post, his scarlet uniform a stark contrast against the ancient stone walls, 8 years of military service evident in his unwavering stance. The first sign of trouble came with the distant rumble of a motorcycle engine. Not the purr of a tourist's rental, but the aggressive growl of a heavily modified machine. The sound drew closer, cutting through the respectful murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. Guard Mitchell's eyes remained fixed forward, but his combat-trained senses noted every detail of the approaching threat. The motorcycle that pulled up to the curb was as black as its rider's intentions. Chrome skull ornaments decorated the handlebars, and various Nordic runes, symbols that had been perverted from their original meaning into something darker, were painted across the gas tank. The rider, a mountain of a man whose leather vest struggled to contain his bulk, dismounted with deliberate slowness. His boots, adorned with steel caps, struck the pavement with heavy purpose. Various patches adorned his vest, some bearing symbols that had caused decent people to shudder since the 1940s. A crude iron cross hung from a chain around his neck. Not the military honour it mimicked, but a cheap replica that spoke of borrowed glory and twisted ideals. Well, well, the biker's voice carried the gravel of too many cigarettes and not enough humanity. Look what we got here! He moved toward Guard Mitchell with the swagger of someone used to intimidating others into submission, standing all pretty in your fancy uniform. The crowd began to shift uneasily. Parents guided their children back, recognizing the familiar tension that preceded violence. A group of elderly visitors, their tour guide's commentary now forgotten, watched with concerned expressions as the biker invaded the ceremonial space. You know what I see when I look at you? The biker circled Guard Mitchell, his shadow falling across the immaculate uniform. I see everything that's wrong with this world. All this. He gestured contemptuously at the castle walls. Tradition and order makes me sick. Guard Mitchell remained motionless, his discipline forged in places where far more dangerous men had tested his resolve. His eyes stayed fixed forward, but every muscle was ready, every sense alert. Years of active service had taught him to read threats, and this one was escalating with textbook predictability. The biker moved closer, the smell of leather and malice preceding him. His fingers, adorned with rings bearing symbols of hate, flexed unconsciously. Your kind always did hide behind uniforms and rules, he sneered, his voice carrying decades of practiced hatred. Too afraid to face real men one-on-one. The morning sun caught Guard Mitchell's brass buttons, each one polished to mirror shine, not for ceremony, but because attention to detail had saved lives in combat zones where he'd earned his right to wear this uniform. The biker's reflection distorted across those buttons, a twisted image that matched the darkness of his intentions. Hey, toy soldier, the biker's voice grew louder, deliberately provocative. I'm talking to you. He moved closer, invading the carefully measured space around Guard Mitchell's post. His massive frame cast a shadow over the guard's polished boots, like a storm cloud promising violence. A pair of German tourists quickly gathered their children, hurrying them away from the unfolding scene. The biker noticed their retreat and sneered. Look at that! People still running scared, just like the old days, eh? His laugh was ugly, carrying echoes of ideologies that had once plunged Europe into darkness. The morning sun caught the Iron Cross hanging from his neck, a mockery of the real military honour it imitated. His vest, adorned with patches that would have been illegal in several European countries, stretched as he squared his shoulders. "But you'll just stand there, won't you? All discipline and protocol." He spat the words like they were poison. An elderly man wearing a Royal Marines veteran's pin stepped forward, his weathered face tight with recognition of the gathering storm. But before he could speak, the biker's head snapped around, fixing him with a glare that had intimidated countless others into silence. "Stay out of this, old man. Your generation had their chance." Guard Mitchell's eyes remained forward, but his combat-trained senses tracked every movement. Through tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, he'd learned to read the signs of impending violence, the subtle shifts in weight, the unconscious flexing of fingers, the telltale changes in breathing patterns. The biker was displaying them all. "You know what your problem is?" The biker circled again, his boots scraping against the pavement like a bull preparing to charge. "You're part of the system that's making everyone soft. All these rules, all this ceremony." He gestured at the castle walls. "While the real men, the strong ones, we're out there living free." His voice carried across the courtyard, where more tourists had stopped to watch the confrontation. Some had backed away to what they hoped was a safe distance, while others stood frozen, unable to look away from the build-up of inevitable violence. "I've been watching you lot," the biker continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "Standing here day after day, playing dress-up soldier while the world laughs." His fingers traced one of the Nordic runes tattooed on his knuckles, ancient symbols of strength perverted into markers of hate. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about real strength, about a time when men didn't hide behind fancy uniforms and royal traditions." Guard Mitchell's posture remained perfect, each crease in his uniform knife-sharp, despite the morning heat. The rifle in his white-gloved hands stayed precisely positioned, not a ceremonial prop, as the biker assumed, but a tool he'd used in combat, defending the very freedoms this man was abusing. "Nothing to say?" The biker moved directly in front of Guard Mitchell, close enough that his breath fogged the brass buttons. "Course not. You're just another puppet, aren't you? Standing here guarding what?" His voice rose with each word, decades of hatred finding a target. "Some fancy building? Some outdated traditions?" A young boy in the crowd tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking in a whisper that carried too far, "Mummy, why is that man so angry?" The question seemed to enrage the biker further. He spun toward the voice, causing several onlookers to flinch. "Why am I angry?" he shouted, playing to his unwilling audience. "Because while real men like me are keeping the old ways alive, society worships these—" He turned back to Guard Mitchell, his face contorted with disgust. "These toy soldiers, these defenders of weakness." What happened next unfolded with the brutal simplicity of a hammer striking steel. The biker, his patience finally exhausted by Guard Mitchell's unwavering discipline, moved with surprising speed for his size. His leather vest creaked with the sudden motion, chains jingling against metal studs as his massive frame launched forward. "Let's see how strong your precious protocol is," he snarled, massive hands shooting forward like pistons. The push was calculated, delivered with the precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of violence. His palms struck Guard Mitchell's chest with enough force to send the soldier staggering backward, leather-clad arms extending fully as years of intimidation and brutality translated into one explosive moment. The impact carried the weight of countless bar fights and back-alley brawls, each one adding to the biker's confidence that might made right. Guard Mitchell's boots scraped against the ancient stones as he fought for balance. The sound of metal heel plates against centuries-old rock created a harsh screech that seemed to cut through the morning air. For a fraction of a second, his perfect posture wavered, ceremonial rifle tilting as gravity took hold. The sunlight caught his brass buttons one last time before the inevitable. Then, with a sound that echoed off the castle walls like a thunderclap, he fell. The impact wasn't dramatic. No Hollywood theatrics, just the simple physics of a body meeting unyielding ground. His ceremonial rifle clattered against the stones, the sound seeming to reverberate through the very foundation of Windsor Castle itself. The biker's laugh boomed across the courtyard, deep and cruel, rolling across the ancient stones like thunder before a storm. "Look at your mighty guardian now!" He raised his arms in triumph, massive fists clenched above his head, his silhouette casting a dark shadow over the fallen guard. The sunlight caught his knuckle tattoos, those twisted runes that had witnessed countless acts of violence, each one telling its own story of hatred and brutality. Nordic symbols that once represented strength and honor, now perverted into markers of hate, gleamed on his skin. "Not so perfect anymore, are you?" Several tourists gasped, their phones forgotten in hands that covered shocked expressions. A child began to cry somewhere in the crowd, the sound quickly muffled by a parent's protective embrace. The elderly veteran took 2 steps forward before his companion grabbed his arm, both men recognizing that this situation had moved beyond civilian intervention. Their faces showed the grim recognition of men who had seen this kind of ideology before, in places where history had been written in blood. A young mother pulled her children behind a stone pillar, her face tight with worry, instinctively shielding them from the display of brute force triumphing over discipline. "This!" The biker turned to address his unwilling audience, arms still raised in victory, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had given similar speeches in dimly lit bars and secret gatherings. "This is what happens when you put faith in weakness, in tradition." His voice carried years of practiced rhetoric. The same poisonous ideology that had once marched across Europe, now echoing off ancient British stones. Each word dripped with contempt for the values the uniform represented. Real strength doesn't bow to protocol. Real men don't hide behind tradition. Guard Mitchell lay there for exactly 3 seconds. His ceremonial rifle had landed beside him, the metal somehow untarnished by its fall, the polished surface reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. His bearskin cap had shifted slightly, revealing eyes that no longer held any trace of ceremony or parade ground protocol. Those eyes had seen combat, in places where real strength meant something very different from what this biker preached. They held the quiet focus of a predator preparing to strike. "Hail victory!" the biker shouted, turning his back on the fallen guard to face the crowd fully. His arms remained raised, victory pose transforming into something darker, more historically sinister. The iron cross swung from his neck like a pendulum, marking the moments before violence, catching the light with each movement. Its sharp edges seemed to cut through the morning air, a symbol of everything that had once threatened to destroy the very civilization these guards protected. See how easily your protector falls. See how quickly tradition crumbles before real power. But he'd made a critical error, one that men like him, drunk on their own sense of superiority, often made. An error that had cost others dearly on real battlefields where Guard Mitchell had earned his right to wear the scarlet uniform. He'd assumed that protocol meant weakness, that discipline meant submission, that a guard's ceremonial stance meant he'd forgotten how to fight. His arrogance had blinded him to the years of combat training hidden beneath the ceremonial exterior. Most critically, he'd turned his back on a soldier who'd earned his uniform not in ceremonies but in combat. A soldier who had faced real enemies in places where victory wasn't measured in crowd reactions and theatrical displays, but in survival and the protection of values worth dying for. Guard Mitchell's eyes locked onto the biker's exposed back. His white-gloved hands pressed against the courtyard stones, combat training replacing ceremonial precision. Each finger found its position with tactical efficiency, preparing for a movement that had been drilled countless times in military training. In that moment, he wasn't just a queen's guard. He was every soldier who'd ever fought against the poisonous ideology this biker represented. His muscles coiled like springs, years of battlefield experience, calculating angles and applying physics in ways no barroom brawler could anticipate. The biker, still celebrating his perceived victory, never saw what was coming. His arms remained raised in that hateful salute, his mouth open in mid-gloat, as Guard Mitchell executed a movement that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with battlefield efficiency. The morning sun caught the guard's brass buttons one final time, as he prepared to demonstrate the difference between theatrical strength and tactical reality. He moved with the fluid precision of a predator. His rise from the ground wasn't the ceremonial movement tourists photographed during the changing of the guard. This was pure combat efficiency, each muscle responding to years of battlefield training. Before the biker's victory, shout could fade from the air, Mitchell's white-gloved hand clamped onto his shoulder with devastating force. The grip wasn't just strong, it was tactically perfect. Mitchell's fingers found pressure points that bikers' bar brawls hadn't prepared him for, and the sudden pain shattered his sense of triumph. Before he could process what was happening, Mitchell executed a precise hip throw that would have made his combat instructors proud. The biker's massive frame went airborne for a split second, his arms still partially raised in that hateful salute. Then gravity took over, and 200 pounds of self-proclaimed real strength crashed onto the ancient stones with a sound that echoed off the castle walls. His leather vest scraped against the pavement, and the cheap iron cross around his neck shattered on impact. But Mitchell wasn't finished. Before the biker could even register the shock of impact, the guard's boot pressed into his chest with calculated pressure. Not enough to cause serious injury, but more than sufficient to communicate absolute control. The highly polished toe cap gleamed in the morning sun, a symbol of discipline, pinning down the embodiment of chaos. "Go ahead," Mitchell's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded men in real combat. "Test your real strength now." His foot maintained perfect pressure as the biker struggled uselessly against the hold. Each movement only demonstrated how completely he was trapped, how thoroughly his perceived superiority had been shattered. The biker's face contorted with rage and disbelief. His massive arms strained against the pressure, muscles bulging beneath tattoos that preached hatred. But Mitchell's stance was tactically flawless. Each attempt to rise only resulted in another painful reminder of who held the real power. "Can't move, can you?" Mitchell's tone remained measured, professional. Funny how all that hatred, all that supposed strength, amounts to nothing against proper training. His boot shifted slightly, finding another pressure point that made the biker's next struggle even more futile. "Let me explain something about real strength." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the birds seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their usual chatter absent from the courtyard. The elderly veteran who'd watched earlier nodded in grim approval, recognizing the controlled precision of Mitchell's actions. "This uniform," Mitchell continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard, "isn't about ceremony. It's about discipline, control, the very things your kind has always feared." His boot maintained perfect pressure as he spoke, each word punctuated by the biker's futile attempts to break free. "In Afghanistan, I fought against men who thought like you, who believed that hatred made them strong." The biker tried to spit out a response, but Mitchell's tactical positioning made even that simple act difficult. "Those men learned what you're learning now. That real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about control, discipline, the very things you mock because you can't understand them." A bead of sweat rolled down the biker's forehead, cutting through the dirt left by his impact with the ground. His next struggle was weaker, the reality of his situation finally beginning to sink in. The patches on his vest, symbols of hatred and supposed power, were now smeared with the dust of his defeat. "You see," Mitchell's voice took on an edge of steel, "while you were practicing intimidation in bars, I was learning real combat in war zones. While you were collecting symbols of hatred, I was earning medals defending the freedom you abuse." His boot shifted again, maintaining control with clinical precision. "The strength you pretend to have? We use it to protect people from men like you." The biker's face had turned an interesting shade of purple, partly from exertion, partly from the humiliation of being so completely dominated. His next words came out in a strained gasp. "You can't do this." "Actually," Mitchell replied, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "I can. The moment you laid hands on a Queen's Guard, you gave me every right to respond with appropriate force." His grip remained perfect, despite the biker's continued struggles. "And right now, I'm using only a fraction of what I'm authorized to employ." "Let me tell you something about the uniform you just disrespected," Mitchell's voice cut through the morning air with military precision. His boot remained firmly planted on the biker's chest, each struggle met with calculated pressure that spoke of years of combat training. "During World War II, men wearing this uniform stood against everything you represent." The biker tried to twist away, but Mitchell's positioning was flawless. Each movement only served to demonstrate how completely he was controlled. "Your kind," Mitchell continued, "marched across Europe wearing symbols just like the ones on your vest. They thought they were the embodiment of strength, too." Mitchell's white gloves remained pristine despite the earlier fall, a testament to the same attention to detail that made his combat holds inescapable. "They learned what you're learning now. That real power isn't about intimidation. It's not about hatred. It's about discipline, training, and the willingness to stand against men like you." "You don't understand," the biker gasped, his face contorted with rage and growing fear. "We're the real—" "The real what?" Mitchell's voice took on an edge that had been honed in actual combat. "The real men. The strong ones." His boot shifted slightly, finding another pressure point that made the biker's next struggle even more futile. "Let me explain something about real strength. I've fought in places you couldn't find on a map, against enemies who made you look like a playground bully." The morning sun caught Mitchell's medals. Not ceremonial decorations, but awards earned in combat zones, where the difference between strength and weakness was measured in survival. "This uniform represents everything that stopped your kind 70 years ago. Every button, every crease, every medal stands for the triumph of discipline over brutality." The biker's next attempt to break free was met with such precisely applied pressure that he could only grunt in frustrated pain. His patches and symbols, which had seemed so intimidating minutes ago, now looked cheap and meaningless against the genuine authority Mitchell represented. "You want to know what real strength looks like?" Mitchell's voice carried across the courtyard, where tourists stood in respectful silence. "It's standing guard for hours in any weather, maintaining discipline while tourists mock and drunks provoke. It's representing centuries of tradition that protected this nation from men who wore the very symbols you display so proudly." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a tone that carried steel beneath its professional calm. "But most importantly, it's having the power to break you." His boot shifted again, demonstrating just how easily he could increase the pressure, and choosing not to. That's the difference between us. You worship power without understanding it. We master it without worshipping it. The biker's face had lost some of its arrogance, but his eyes still burned with hatred. His mouth opened, presumably to spew more ideology, but Mitchell's next words cut him off. "Take a good look around you," Mitchell commanded. "Look at these walls. They've stood against stronger men than you. This uniform, it's guarded kings and queens, stood fast against real threats, not weekend warriors playing at being tough." His voice carried the weight of every soldier who'd ever worn the uniform. The same discipline you mocked earlier, it's what's keeping you conscious right now. The elderly veteran who'd watched earlier stepped forward, his campaign medals catching the light. "I served in Northern Ireland," he announced, his voice carrying the same quiet authority as Mitchell's. "Faced men who thought violence made them powerful. They learned the same lesson you're learning now, that real strength serves something greater than itself." Mitchell's boot hadn't moved an inch, maintaining the same precise pressure that had controlled the biker from the start. "So here's what's going to happen," he stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "The police are on their way. You're going to be charged with assaulting a Queen's Guard, a serious offence that carries serious consequences." His eyes locked onto the biker's face, combat-hardened gaze meeting hatred without flinching. "But more importantly, you're going to remember this moment. Every time you look in the mirror and see those symbols of supposed strength, you'll remember how easily real discipline overcame them." The sound of approaching police sirens cut through the morning air, mixing with the biker's laboured breathing. Mitchell maintained his perfect control, the pressure of his boot unwavering as two police officers hurried into the courtyard. Their faces showed they'd been briefed on the situation. This wasn't their first encounter with someone who'd learned the hard way about respecting the Queen's Guard. "Assault on a Queen's Guard," the first officer stated, his tone professional, but carrying a hint of disgust as he noted the symbols adorning the biker's vest. "That's a serious offence, sir." The word "sir" carried none of the respect it usually implied. As the officers moved to take control of the situation, Mitchell executed a perfect tactical handoff. His boot lifted from the biker's chest with the same precision he'd shown throughout the encounter, allowing the police to secure the still struggling man. The biker's attempts to resist were met with swift, professional restraint. "You'll regret this," the biker spat as handcuffs clicked into place. "My brothers will..." "Will what?" Mitchell cut him off, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had dominated the entire encounter. "Come test their strength against real training. Please do encourage them." His eyes, no longer holding any trace of ceremonial patience, locked onto the biker's face. "We'll be here." The biker's face contorted with impotent rage as the officers led him away. His boots, which had strutted so confidently earlier, now scraped awkwardly against the stones. The patches and symbols on his vest seemed to shrink under the morning sun, their manufactured menace exposed as hollow in the face of genuine authority. Mitchell's attention turned to his fallen rifle. With movements that spoke of years of training, he retrieved it from the ground, checking it for damage with practiced efficiency. Finding none, he resumed his post with parade ground precision. His uniform, despite the earlier scuffle, remained remarkably unruffled, a testament to the same attention to detail that had allowed him to control a much larger opponent. The elderly veteran approached, pausing a respectful distance from Mitchell's post. "Royal Marines, 82 to 95, he stated quietly. "Good to see the standards haven't dropped." His campaign medals caught the light as he straightened to attention and offered a crisp salute. Mitchell's eyes remained forward, but his posture acknowledged the veteran's presence. The moment passed between them without need for further words. Two soldiers, separated by decades, but united in understanding what the uniform truly represented. The crowd began to disperse, but their usual chatter was subdued. Parents led their children away, many taking the opportunity to explain the difference between real strength and the kind that had just been so thoroughly defeated. The German tourists from earlier had returned, their faces showing grim satisfaction at seeing symbols of hatred overcome by disciplined authority. A few yards away, one of the biker's patches lay in the dust where it had been torn loose during his fall. The Nordic rune it displayed, meant to symbolize strength, now seemed pathetically small against the backdrop of Windsor Castle's ancient walls. A street sweeper would later dispose of it without ceremony, consigning it to the same dustbin where similar symbols had ended up decades ago. As the day continued at Windsor Castle, tourists came and went, many unaware of the morning's events. But those who had witnessed it carried away something more valuable than photos or souvenirs. They had seen the reality behind the ceremonial facade, the steel beneath the scarlet uniform. Guard Mitchell continued his watch, his bearing perfect, his attention focused forward. To casual observers, he appeared exactly as he had before the incident, a ceremonial guard maintaining his watch. But those who looked closer might notice subtle differences. The way his boots planted more firmly on the stones, how his grip on the rifle carried the readiness of recent combat, the heightened awareness in his stance that spoke of lessons learned in battle and reinforced in the heart of London. What makes a uniform more than just fabric and brass? Is it the traditions it represents, or the character of those who wear it? Perhaps, as we witness today, it's both, the perfect fusion of historical dignity and present-day strength, ready to stand firm against those who mistake ceremony for weakness. The next time you see a Queen's Guard standing motionless at their post, remember this. Behind that ceremonial stance lies years of combat training. Under that bearskin cap is a soldier who has likely served in the world's most dangerous places. Those who mistake their discipline for weakness do so at their own peril. What would you do if faced with such a display of disrespect? Would you have the discipline to wait for the right moment, or would you let anger override training? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like this video and share it with others who understand that respect isn't just given. It's earned through discipline, dedication, and the courage to stand firm against those who challenge the values we hold dear. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss a new video. Until next time, remember that those who stand guard over our traditions do so not because they're bound by ceremony, but because they've earned the right to represent something greater than themselves. Because sometimes the quietest stance carries the loudest message. And those who mistake silence for weakness may find themselves learning the hardest lessons. Be sure to check out the videos appearing on your screen now. Each one has a powerful message you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching.